Welcome to SENSESPACE. I'm Jacob Kishere. I hope you're having a wonderful July. This is a dialogue with Daniel Zaruba, a philosopher and friend and participant in the pioneering field of dialogos, or practice. And as many of you know, dialogos has really been the inspiration throughout this whole project of SENSESPACE for the last about 3.5 years now. And something that I've practiced very deeply, that I've delved into, that I feel has enormous potential for human consciousness and relationship. So with this new dialogue with Daniel, I'm going to be launching off a series called the Doors of Dialogos, and the intention is to really dive deeply into the nature of dialogos, exploring many different dimensions of it with the pioneers of the practice and the people who are most passionate about dialogos. So I'm super stoked to offer this and to go on this mini journey within the larger journey of SENSESPACE and the journey of philosophy and love and wisdom. So great to have you alongside, and really excited to share this particular dialogue with Daniel, in which we explore remembering the dimension of being, the relationship between art and philosophy, dialogos and prayer, and some of the dangers of sophistry and political implications of a wisdom-oriented community. So thank you very much, and hope you enjoy.
Okay, you're listening to SENSESPACE. Today I'm here with Daniel Zaruba, and we're going to be diving into dialogue, exploring, hopefully opening up some of the doors of Dialogos, a practice which Daniel has been delving deeply into over the last year, last several years, I should say. And just before I hand it over to you, I just want to offer an intention for the dialogue today, that we will explore somewhere we didn't expect to get to, that we will, in some sense, go beyond our expectation, go beyond ourselves, and be surprised by the intelligence and resonance available through this practice, which is so dear to me, and a big part of your life and your contribution as well. So welcome, Daniel.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to our dialogue.
Likewise. Here we are. So yeah. And it's interesting because you've been engaging in this series with Guy and your other collaborator, forgive me, the name I have forgotten already. And in that series, you're really exhibiting the practice. You're not just kind of rolling into the conversation. You're also kind of showing what you're doing as you're doing it. So that's potentially a dynamic for us to explore here, in service of people's own exploration of dialogos as well. And so I'm going to play a little bit with those meta observations as we go through, at least at the outset. Because what I'm feeling now is kind of the gathering of the open space of the field. And there's not a clear question. The question for me is more in drawing my orientation to the space from which the question is going to arise. And it's not necessarily that I'm going to get it and it's going to come like that. But there is something very important about the clearing and the tuning into the space of possibility at the outset of the dialogue that seems to create a kind of playing field or a space in which we can then begin to place something, or indeed observe something that's already there, and then from that place, we get a thread, we begin to move, and it's not necessarily it's almost as if finding that thread or placing that piece, we're beginning to sort of open up a whole matrix of connections and ideas, and all the books that are behind you on the wall, and all the conversations that you've had, and all the conversations I've had, that somehow will be drawn together in a particular way, in a unique way in this conversation. And I know that wasn't a question mark, but I'm passing it to you because I've concluded my remark.
Yeah, I would say that the field of dialogue is almost as important as the dialogue itself, field where this all takes place, right? And in order to intentionally enter this field, then that takes virtue, that takes wisdom, that takes also some comportment that lets you do that. Because I think why today in our culture conversations have become often so difficult is because we have forgotten to enter that field where we can really mutually tap into each other's perspective and bring them together in a kind of harmonic whole. So I mean, I can talk a little bit about my experience with Dialogos if you want.
Yeah, I would love that. Just one question on what you just said before.
Sure.
That those difficult conversations, as the difficulty of having dialogue be a communion like experience that it can be. Are you saying that the field is like there's no awareness of the field dynamic being there, or there's no attending to it at the outset, but is it the case that the field is already there, always acting, even if we just roll up into a conversation and we just assume ignorance of those dynamics or the need to attend to them? It's just there in the background, like invisible? Are we kind of hiding it from ourselves?
No, I would say that, phenomenology, this is like one of the key insights from phenomenology, is that things, can appear, like one and the same thing can appear in different modalities, can show itself in different ways. It's like not that all things are the same all the time. Like things can show forth in different ways. Now, I would say then, there are different fields we are inhabiting, but we are not aware that we are inhabiting different fields. Most of the time, we're kind of inert to those differences, to fields, but also the differences, how things show themselves in different ways. So a philosopher I really like, Nishitani Keiji from the Kyoto school, talks about three fields in his major work, Religion and Nothingness. First one being the kind of the field of consciousness, which is something like modern subjectivity. And that's also something that we usually do not realize when we are in that enclosure of subjectivity, which is also the enclosure that, for example, phenomenology or Heidegger or the Kyoto school, they try to overcome this, which is often the subject, its keyword is like the subject-object division. The other field for Nishitani would be the field of nihility, where all things appear in a kind of alienation, in a kind of ontological alienation. I would also argue that this has similar to what Heidegger calls the standing reserve, where then beings can be manipulated and operated with in certain respects. And then the last field for him is the field of shunyata, or the field of emptiness, which is like there a being is in its home ground. There a being shows forth in its suchness, just as it is. And then also the human being has or brings forth his or her original self, if that field or that point is minded by the human being. Now, these practices that we are doing, in my opinion, also require things like wisdom, things like meditation, and so on, in order to get out of the field of consciousness, which is the field which we usually inhabit, and then get into the field of, let's say, emptiness, where we are in this dimension where sense can arise in the first place. Maybe to use your channel name, it's the original sense space. Because in the field of consciousness, everything's just directed to you. You, in a sense, are the center of all sense, but not in the field of shunyata. That's why things like surrendering or kenosis, so like the what is the translation? Kind of giving over oneself to the other, and all of these things. These are things one can do in order to inhabit that field.
Okay, so a little bit of what I just heard in what you said. So we're inhabiting a field of consciousness, normative consciousness, but we don't necessarily see that or know it. And every individual in particular, just to sort of ground it in my own experience, I often do find I don't know my own field of consciousness until it's brought into dialogue with another. In this case, a person in dialogue. Coming into the conversation, I'm moving from like my field, which is to a certain extent invisible to me, and then it's by the contrast of the other field that it begins to be known. I can kind of, there's a mirroring and there's a knowing of my own field by contrast of the other. But then you're also saying there's a whole host of capacities outside of the dialogue, such as your wisdom, your capacity for presence, I suppose, is what's indicated by the meditation, your awareness, your capacity to, your having had some experience of surrender seems to be somehow conducive to the likelihood of being surrendered to the greater whole of the dialogue. So that's all very lovely and interesting. Unfortunately, again, I'm not ending my sentences in questions, but I think that's okay, because we're building, we're kind of laying out, we're putting some pickup sticks down here, and we're getting a little bit of a sense of the terrain of the emptiness in some way. I think we need to gradually build an understanding of the Dialogos and what is entailed in it, in order to sort of know it by the absence of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So from my experience with doing dialectic into Dialogos for, again, a year, but I've done it before as well, sometimes more regularly, sometimes more irregularly. One thing that's very curious is is when all of the participants are surrendering to the other and to the space. So like they are not, in their own head, in their own field, let's say field of subjectivity. They do not have any, judgments, let's say, about the other. They do not value what the other says. But they're just giving themselves over to the intelligibility that's arising. Then the funny thing is that there's really a kind of line that's taking you and leading you somewhere. And that's a line that we are all participating in, but none of us is really guiding that. It's very mysterious what it is. But this feeling is present a lot. There's suddenly, we are all there with our perspectives, but there's a fountain which informs all the perspectives that are present in the dialogue, or in the trialogue, or how many people are present. The fountain of all perspectives is itself null perspective. We surrender to that really brings us to places which we could not, to which we could not come to on our own. And that's very interesting. And then the thing is, for example, when you do philosophical fellowship, where you kind of extend your dialogue to a sage that's, just dwelling in a book or in a quote or in a paragraph. We've done this with people like Buber or Eckhart or Carl Jung or Heidegger, who knows? Can do it with everyone. But then the perspective of that person is also present. So like, then suddenly you see, okay, this field is not just between you and me, but it's like, it's extending through time, basically. And then you see that this field is truly open. And then we realize that the reciprocality within the field of emptiness is really one that's not just now, but also has a temporal dimension, which extends like far beyond. Like it's just not just in the now, but it's like it's mirroring into past and future.
Right. The through line that John talks about, kind of, I think of it like the structure of a tree, like the roots coming in, and then the singular through line, and then the branches coming out. And there's something that image seems to speak to what happens when we're not just observing that through line, that current in the middle, but we're participating in it. Then there's this kind of vertical dimension as well. There's a lot of pieces come in here, and a lot of them are religious in nature. I
can tell you, by the way, it's often when we did this practice, by the way, if somebody is interested, these would be on my channel or on Guy Sengstock's channel.
Yeah.
So we often started at a neutral place, and then like 40 minutes later, we're talking about religious imagery. But we did not plan to go there. It just happens. Like, it also it's just a very curious thing that I noticed.
Yeah, I mean, if I trace the course of my own trajectory over the last several years, I can see a track from psychedelic induced mystical experience to Dialogos as a more available day-to-day access point, and something that, you know, you're not just in dialogue with yourself and the entheogen, the plant medicine, but you're in dialogue with yourself or with Guy or with whomever, and all of those are unique mirrors. Mirror may not be the best word for it, but subsequent to that, I've been in a deep dive into Christianity. Over the course of the last year, it really opened up for me. As Christianity usually does in the midst of some sort of personal devastation and difficulty. But through the course of that, prayer as a practice came to be a really substantial part of my life and my ecology of practices. And so when you spoke about the availability of the field, or the sense of like, you kind of evoked this notion that it's somehow like always available. Were you properly conformed to it, then you would be in contact with it. And that reminds me very much of prayer. And in addition to that, I've been listening to Ken Lowry and speaking with him, and he's been engaging with John. And Ken talks about his experience of the resonance of prayer. And when he's speaking, I often have had aversion to the traditional prayers, the older prayers, but he spoke about the idea that when he speaks those words, he's in that vertical with all of the people who have used those as a means to commune with God. And I haven't experienced that in relation to those older prayers, but I have found in old temples, in crypts, and old 1,000-year-old churches, which there are a few of in England, that I feel the resonance of that. And so bringing in quite a few pieces here, but I think it will be helpful. Rupert Sheldrake, you're familiar with him. His ideas around morphic resonance, morphic fields have really interestingly interacted with the experience of praying in the crypt and feeling like there's a potency to this space because of all the people who have prayed in it before, because the sanctification of the space that's occurred. And so two of the things that I've wondered about is, well, the first one I'm not wondering about, I actually know it, and you probably feel the same way, is that when you've cultivated a field, when you've participated with others in it, in a dialogos practice, continually over time, there's something about the substantiality or availability of that field that it's morphically, its morphic field is more available as a consequence. But then the question for me is like, does that then extend beyond the bounds of the dialogue with those people into other people who weren't in that dialogue? Like, is dialogos in some way rippling outwards into dialogues that occur outside of it?
What kind of dialogues do you mean now?
Meaningful conversations that people.
So the question is like, how do, let's say, meaningfully accomplished dialogues, what's their impact, or how do they relate to other dialogues? Is that like the question?
Yeah, other dialogues, but I suppose at the root of that is a question around how connected is what's occurring in the dialogos field with the larger field of life.
Mm. I would say, as human beings, we are always oscillating between modes in a sense. Now we could, how can we go there? Let's say there's an old distinction, which is work and leisure. And in some sense, you can even, think about the Platonic cave in a sense. Sometimes we're just having to do things where we're not really engaged with the sense of things. That's kind of work. It's just things, that you have to do them. Needs, we just have to fulfill them. We don't, and often, we don't want to do them. Contingent factors, that impact our life. I could walk out and, I break my leg and then I can, then I'm just, I have to go to the hospital, I have to see a doctor, and I have to, then I'm in a different field. Okay. Leisure, on the other hand, is philosophically, we could make the case that leisure is that time where we are where the sense of things is available to us. There's a nice quote that I often have in mind when talking about this by a Catholic philosopher from Germany, Joseph Pieper, who had written a book, Leisure as the Basis of Culture. And he says what leisure, or the Greek word would be skole, what leisure is to time, the temple is to space. And that came up because we were talking about crypts and churches and so on. So it fits with that. I will repeat it because it's a little bit. So what leisure is to time, the temple is to space. so those things, are sheltering, in a sense, the sense of things, meaning of things. Okay, it's a dimension where sense can arise. Now, why do I say all of this? For me, it's more a question of, can our culture again find a way towards something like dignified leisure, where we can practice what Plato would call anamnesis, where we are remembering the dimension of being, the dimension of sense. Those things can all be, going to church, praying, reading a philosophy book for hours, doing dialectic into dialogos, doing meditation. All of these things can help us to remember that more original field, that more original dimension where the sense can arise. And of course, then, those times where those places where that can arise, then there we build a temple. Then also Zoom can be a home. Then even Zoom can be, the fireplace where we are gathered. But in the past, of course, these were churches, these were temples, these were dojos, these were other things, but we live in a digital age, so everything's reconfiguring, so to say, and then the spaces of meaning cultivation are somewhere else, YouTube or Zoom, or at least, for many of us.
No, that's a really lovely quote. And yeah, I don't know if this is quite relevant, but for me, initially, I found it very important to actually be in the temple, in the church in this case, and going to a particular place was very affording. Like going through the big heavy wooden door into the space of the church allowed me to really know that I was entering into a different realm, and I could become more sensitized to that shift, and I would dip my finger in the holy water, and this was also a symbolic, a mini baptism, and then the comportment of the particular postures of the body in prayer, like these things also all helped to distill. And then I moved to the middle of nowhere in Wales, where I didn't have a car, and so I had to make a home temple. I had to make a little shrine, as the kind of Buddhists and Hindus, I guess, often have in their homes. And so I got my icon that I picked up years ago of Jesus from Greece, and the candles, and I was able to a decent extent to reconnect with the same, and sometimes even imaginally putting myself back in the church was helpful to get that. And so there is some loose but meaningful similarity here in the dialogue, that we remember the place of dialogue as the temple, as we're entering it, but with some sort of ritual, but perhaps also simply in the course of it. It's almost a temple making rather than just arriving in it. We have to actually endow space-time with those qualities. And I suppose one of the questions I'm living in relationship to prayer, in relationship to trying to cultivate more continuity of connection with God, is it simply that I am, through being more continuously conformed with this original field, as you put it, and I don't want to collapse those distinctions if they're meaningfully different, but they sound overlapping. So if I'm meaningfully conformed with that field or with relationship to God more readily, then life becomes available to me in a different way, and things happen, synchronicities occur, encounters with strangers, so on, become pleasant surprises. And I'm able to perceive the deeper movements of patterns in the lives of people around me, that they're not always sensitive to as they're in them. So that's profound, but it's a matter of me being conformed differently to what already is, in a way that then is like I'm sensitive to what happens, and that means I can have more of those moments occur, those moments of beauty or connection or what have you. But there's another possibility at hand, which is that actually when I'm conforming myself in prayer or being connected with the Logos through dialogue, that actually that is that's in dialogue with the whole, with God, in such a way that it's not just me being conformed to what is, but it's actually that what is in subtle ways coming to meet me or being drawn in correspondence with me. In a certain sense, is prayer having a miraculous metaphysical impact non-locally through the field of life in a way that we can't understand or see, but isn't just us being more open and conformed, but is actually, however you want to put it, quantum entanglement, magnetism. It's actually drawing things in, or it's shifting matter or people, the way that things show up.
When you did this, how does that feel, invoking this meta dimension?
It feels very flowy, and it feels I mean, this is very much often how I describe the process of dialogos with people. I describe it as a kind of self-other tantric movement where I'm in myself, I'm in the other, and then in the betweenness, back and forth, is when I get into the mystery space.
And that's wonderful. This is like, there's a reciprocal exchange. We're not shut down again in our field of subjectivity, where we're just, closed into ourselves. But we make a leap, and then this reciprocality can occur. Our self is then flowy, so it's like it's open, it's porous. It's more like water that's flowing, but it's not like a substance, like a rock, that's closed or something. So yeah, and I would definitely say that honest prayer, authentic prayer can also bring you to a place where it's not maybe like that, but it's more like between communion, between let's say God and you. I often just want to highlight, that all of these things can be done inauthentically. You can go to church, you can go to prayer, but all of this sense, can be alien to you. Think about, Kierkegaard and or Nietzsche, them criticizing, the Christianity of their time. People just go there because of habits. And then, when they leave, there's nothing Christian about them. But I mean, nominally, they're Christians and going to the church and saying all of these things. But they are not invested. They weren't invested. That was the critique of people like Nietzsche and Kierkegaard. Thoughts like most of Christianity. So what I just would like to stress or emphasize is that one really needs to surrender to these things. Then they can provide an access towards sense or meaning, but they can remain inert. That's all. Just all I would like to say. And that's the great danger of doing. That's something every individual has to recognize for him or herself. I'm doing meditation or I'm doing some spiritual practice, and I'm like, am I inert? Or am I in touch with something? I'm in touch with something that's not quite, it's a little bit mysterious. Or is it just that's that every person has to find that out for him or herself on their own way.
There's like there's definitely a sense of the real deal. You can't mistake the real deal in those experiences when you're having a felt sense of being in relation that is transformative to you by the mere presence of that relation. As in prayer, so in dialogue, like you feel the real dealness of it is the best way I can put it. What is an interesting distinction is that in dialogue, I find the dialogos to actually be quite consistently available with most of my frequent interlocutors who are oriented toward that. We consistently get there through the process of dialogue. But in the process of prayer, it's not always the case. And there's this quality of like people, I remember talking to a cousin of mine about his relationship to prayer, and we'd watched this Scorsese film, The Silence, and this is how he was describing his relationship to prayer. It was like you can have an extended period of feeling like, there's no one on the other end of the line.
Yeah.
And yet there's something to there is something to showing up for the practice, even in the absence of getting in touch with the real. Because like eventually a true prayer can arise out of the kind of silence, out of the lostness of not being able to give to find the words of a true prayer.
Mm.
But then equally, like, it may well be the thing that gets you back in touch is something completely contrary to that. And you can imagine like a Jesuit monk or something just hitting the prayer mat every day and lacerating themselves, but actually going and getting out into nature or doing some intense exercise or music or something might be the thing that re-harmonizes the instrument and brings about the tears, which to me is pretty much most of the time the key fluid. It's like the lubricating fluid that gets the machinery of communion moving again.
Yeah. What I would like to say is that I also experience repeatedly, repeatedly, I experience blissfulness, really deep blissfulness in the practices, and they have a kind of solidity which we cannot, or I cannot deny. It's like there's something, it's just stable. It's just like meditation, when you sit down on the mat in the meditation position, there's something stable about it. It's like that holds, that holds. I think, and the point that I try to make is, in order to make it, maybe it's in the beginning, it's hard. Sometimes it can even be hard, for somebody who's experienced. Then make it, in order to tap into that, more original dimension. Of course, what do our cultures have? I mean, education, training, becoming better at this, inhabit, just learning. And that's just something, that that's an integral part of all of this. So it's not just the practice, but also, how does the learning occur? Because if somebody has never had I know a lot of people who cannot listen to you for 10 minutes. They would lose it, attention span collapses, and I cannot send them, I don't know, 50 hours of awakening from the meaning crisis. Because that doesn't, you need to, this is a serious topic, how do you reach somebody who just doesn't have the capacities to engage in a 2-hour conversation about a difficult topic, or a conversation that's from the whole style is very meditative. It's very, it's very, we try to listen intently and so on. So at some point, this thing, of course, it attracts a lot of people who kind of are naturally inclined to do these things. But at some point, it can only survive if there's really somebody thinks about, okay, what faculties or capacities within us are necessary in order to engage with this more fluently, more skillfully. And so it is, I would say, with prayer, for somebody who is just maybe has just a superficial knowledge of Christianity, then the prayer might not work. It might just remain inert. It might just remain superficial. But for somebody, who is very fluent in the stories of the Old and the New Testament, and has really an access to that mythos and that symbolic way of looking at the world and interacting with the world, then all of it makes sense, I would say. So for me, a lot of it is also a question, of learning again, and how we can again create a culture where those kinds of things are taught to people.
Yeah, I mean, on the first point of those friends, those people who you definitely like, personally for me, I couldn't show up in the way that I do in these dialogues, in those relationships, not even if I tried.
Me too.
Because the field is not available.
Yeah.
Or it's been so preconditioned of a long time to be a certain way that it's like not helpful to try and bring all of this stuff in. Like it wouldn't translate necessarily.
Just saying this, this is a perennial question that's also in Plato's cave. How do you go back to all these people who are blinded by shadows? Today we would maybe say, I don't know, mass media, Netflix,
right?
What's all. Sometimes, John Vervaeke, and he sometimes talks about, seducing them out. But what actually, what Plato tells us in the myth of the cave is, no, they want to kill you. They stab Socrates. Socrates is forced to drink the hemlock. The seduction doesn't work. He's tried for seducing the youth. So it's a perennial question, how to make that thing available and how to bring the people who are not in touch with it, to bring them into that, field of sense.
Yeah, this is a really rich intersection. I recollect touching on it with OG Rose, in one of our Christianity conversations, in which we were talking about how do you bring if you try and bring the mountaintop experience down, someone who hasn't had that experience, it's unhelpful and potentially unfair and not useful. And the question was like, what's the meaningful way to actually bring that down and through into the everyday interaction? Where we got to was effectively love. Love was the thing that did not require them to experience what you'd experienced or have the conceptual landscape, but you could still be bringing something through But what you've put forward here, I really appreciate you situating it in the perenniality of the problem of philosophers and mystics for all time. So I think there's two ways that I'm thinking about how it can be brought out, and I do want to hear a bit more from you about the kind of pedagogical vision. But for me, I've been branching into music a lot more, and I've also been working on my substack, which is not really about dialogos. It's more kind of reflections of my life journey, and so it's called Culturepilgrim. And with that, there's a whole there's an effort to cultivate an aesthetic, not for the purpose of seduction, but hopefully in the making of what's beautiful to me, it is seductive. And you can say, well, that's that's the people who are going to be drawn to it anyway. But hopefully, it's them plus a little more. Or it's like there's some porosity in our fields of awareness and social media and communication that some element is coming through. And I do hope, like in the music, for instance, to bring some of these notions into rap, into something that's much more kind of like in music, you don't have to think it through. If it's musically true, then the ears receive it and it just comes through, and people are like, they don't have to have a conceptual buy-in. It's just, oh, this is bouncing, this is good. And then also the consciousness of the lyrics can suffuse into culture. And I think you do see that with like there has been like a trend in a lot of big rappers, like Kendrick Lamar's recent album was I would say like injecting a lot of consciousness about ancestral healing and trauma and shadow work and connecting with God and connecting with the spirit of nature. Like all of this stuff was infused into the album. And there were a lot of people who were like, I liked it better when he was just angry and talking about the street shit. But a lot of people will have been impacted by that. And so art is definitely one way that I think the philosophical scene and community will best communicate itself. And I do see a lot of promising artists and people who are doing art and philosophy at the same time. So that feels really, really juicy.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It's funny, what Plato says in the myth of the caves. The chains are falling off of the cave people. They're not taken away by anybody. They also do not do this themselves. They just fall off. And it's often, right, it's often, maybe there is a time, in all of our lives where we were also going with the flow of the culture. And then suddenly that dimension arises. Suddenly, it often happens very suddenly. We engage ourselves more and more with it, and so on. I think what Plato was just very acutely aware of, that there are people who are doing all of this for the sake of power, which are the sophists. And for those people, then knowledge acquisition is, for example, for power, for money, for status, or wealth, not for wisdom or religiosity or spirituality. So
to be more sophisticated, right? The where sophistication is originally from is the sophist.
True.
They're so eloquent in their language that you can't distinguish true wisdom from sophistication, intellectual sophistication that, is like, oh, they sound so clever. I want to go and study under them and so on.
Yeah. And that's a great danger, because that I see now. There's a problem, this is completely different box, but it has to do, information explosion in a sense. What we are doing on YouTube is very new for like our species in a sense. We always had there were people who were scholars, accomplished people who were kind of curating knowledge. But today we are all, in a sense, in those fields, wisdom, spirituality, and so on. We are all left to our own devices. And I would say it's likely that you rather find somebody who's sophisticated in the sense you just outlined than somebody who really wants to genuinely offer you wisdom. Even in this space, there's no knowledge curation going on YouTube. It's just we are uploading everything, and it's just and we all are just we are left to our own, maybe John would call it relevance realization, to find out what's the best. Nobody's helping us with that. So this whole dimension, of teachers is not there. And universities, in my opinion, have also abandoned that more comprehensive task. We learn a lot of knowledge, but like philosophia in the ancient sense is barely present in universities. And there's a lot of knowledge where I would say that it's completely hostile to some strands of postmodernism. And it has all to do, with, in some sense, there's too much information. And also the last universal scholar was Alexander von Humboldt in around 1700. After that, there was just this explosion of knowledge. Nobody could keep up with all the fields of knowledge and hold them together. So that's just making the problem, I would say, more severe for our age. With this, with this whole problem, I just read it like 3 days ago. I read again Nietzsche and the God is Dead aphorism. This whole problem that science and religion are more or less opposed to each other in our day and age, and not like mutually supporting each other. This is like still an ongoing problem that we haven't solved really in the cultural domain. How to bring together the scientific worldview and maybe the religious symbolic worldview. They're more like antagonists. And that's just, again, also making the problem more severe. Because then this has also to do with the field of dialogue, I read in a book, in a history book, in Germany, even at the beginning of the 20th century, people who would say they are secular, like physicists, natural scientists, were interested in what's going on in theology, philosophy, and so on, and vice versa. Like people who were into philosophy and theology kind of knew what was going on in the secular world, and they had dialogues. But in my estimation, this is also barely going on, apart from a few figures, maybe like, maybe Ian McGilchrist, John Levakey, maybe. Others are, you mentioned Rupert Sheldrake before. I mean, he's not part of he's not accepted by the scientific community. So he's kicked out of that field, and that's a problem, of course. So and now I feel like I've opened much more problems with all of it.
I think we can work with this. There's a lot here. I am sensitive that we had proposed to be finishing in 5 minutes, and I want to see if you have some more runway for this dialogue, or you have a hard stop, or
we can go a little bit longer. Yeah, sure.
Okay. Do you want to just intuit it, or should we set a particular time?
Let's go at, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes. That's all right.
Awesome. All right. Okay, so there's this profound fragmentation that's occurred. And the spirit of the pre-modern scholar that's kind of not just, that's both binding together and also kind of holding this lineage intergenerationally as well. It seems that what's demanded is definitely a binding process, a binding force. And herein the Dialogos flows through as a profound bridge building sandbox, because the quality of these dialogues does move between so many different terrains as we have today, and hopefully in doing so identifies connections with them that have been forgotten through that fragmentation. In a certain sense, we are, or the self-organizing wisdom of this form of dialogue, and if we want to expand it out, the creatively organizing logos that brings the chaos of the fragmentation into a bound, woven kind of, thread, rope, tapestry of intelligibility, or just enough to get humanity in through the next eye of the needle, through across into the next kind of horizon of unknownness. And of course, this is profoundly important now, even more so than 100 and 200 years ago, because of the breadth of discoveries that have occurred. I think especially in relation to physics and astronomy and the sheer depth and breadth of the known universe, combined with the quantum universe together. Like I think that we've had these explosions in knowledge that are not actually properly bound and situating our sense of selfhood, what it means to be human, what's important in our lives. And we often get glimpses of this. People have, moments staring up at the night sky, or there's a lot of like kind of low quality Netflix documentaries about space and stuff, and you get a little bit of a taste of wonder. And for a moment, maybe you resituate your selfhood in your life, but it's not bound. It doesn't have the binding, the religio kind of quality in which actually our knowledge and our wisdom are in coherence.
I would put forth to you that I think religio is just, I think every human being has experienced glimpses of wonder, where you look at the night sky and you're just in awe of the world, or creation, or being, everything that is. Religio is that which helps you to be in touch, participate with that element, remember it on a kind of reliable basis. So that you just, it's just a matter of holding yourself in the world in such a way that binds you, right? Religio is binding, binds you to the wonder, but then also, like, again, the sense of beings in the dimension of sense. Such that what Nishitani would call this, the self-realization of reality, that mutual coupling of self and world can occur or can realize itself. But then it's just, do we have a culture where, somebody has a glimpse of it, then it's easy for that person to again find the way out of the Platonic cave and find the way out of, forgetting. And remember that being in wonder and so on. Or do we have a culture which, it's very easy, to do other things and distract ourselves with other stuff. And I would say, that the proper education just teaches you the thing, that from the body, be it music, be it sports or gymnastics, be it literature, myths, and so on, that we can be just more in touch with the sense of things. And I think all of this is very simple, to be honest. The problem is just that, science, it's I find often it's problem. The problem is not so. Scientism is one problem. So it's on the problem, philosophical worldviews. That's certain, and then, I mean, these are issues that need to be dealt out philosophically, I would say. But what dialogos can do is maybe train us in such a way that we can also accept a different position than ours, and we can, in the spirit of dialogue, we can also maybe have arguments, have disagreements. That's often important, and not just, go away again into our own echo chamber, but stay in touch. Because dialogos can help us remember that there is a source in which that we all share, a fountain of intelligibility to which we all belong. That I think dialogos can really do. Regards, different worldviews, different philosophical perspectives, and so on. But that's I would say at the heart of it, that we tap into that dimension to which we all belong.
This is a kind of there was a spark that was thrown out when you spoke about the for example, the postmodern forces that are actively hostile to this in some sense, and Socrates being killed, and Jesus being killed, and
mystics being named heretics.
right. And this matter of power with the sophists. Like there's a little through line I've been tracking, and it seems pertinent also to the capacity to engage in deep disagreement honorably is something to do with power, like integrated power. Is something that also is a property that emerges from fullness of spirit. And so I also see a political dimension, not in any traditional sense of political programs, but when the status quo is so broken down, the ones who are cultivating genuine wisdom at a certain point, there's a potency to that in touchness that has a kind of self-evident sense making, and over time, with interaction with reality and dealing with the world, it takes on the capacity to move powerfully. And I've, just in the last year, I've begun to see like more spiritual, philosophical leaders like Aubrey Marcus and Charles Eisenstein, these people that are gathering, organizing, doing practices and so on, but there's a political quality to it. And they're all kind of congregating now around Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s presidential bid, which is like, straight into that arena. But more broadly, there's an open question for me of how power and potency is generated through these fields, as much as listening and tranquility.
Yeah, that's a
the power of bliss, there's a power in bliss as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maybe beyond
the scope of this.
But it's always good to end on an upwards launching into the next question. But
no, maybe just saying, I agree. I have to say I don't know these people so well that you mentioned right now. So I tried to follow politics not so much. Especially American politics. I know not too many things, but anyways, there is definitely a political dimension to this, because it again, it goes at really some of the heart, of how to constitute social life. I mean, do we gather in the church on Sunday, or do we go to the club on Saturday evening until 6 a.m. and then sleep while church is going on? It's really going at the heart of, how to make social life, The secular answer is, that this is all up to the individual and to the ability to reason that each individual has. So how we use our freedom, that's up to us. That's in some, but then of course there will be more lines of difference in the culture, which will eat us up at some point, because there's just too much difference and like no identity, which is also a perennial problem, how to manage identity and difference. So, and then, this is like what happened to Protestantism. They're just fragmenting. Like no mothership that's holding everything together. And I think this is in some sense also, happening in the culture, fragmenting into echo chambers and echo chambers and echo chambers. And YouTube, you know, just helps to create more and more echo chambers. So again, what I said before, our solution is that every individual has to solve this for him or herself. I personally think this is a very risky solution. It's not the best solution, certainly, but it is what it is right now. And yeah, thinking beyond it, I would also have to think more about it, like in more greater detail. Like, I don't really have an answer to that problem, to be honest. I can just tell that Dialogos is great and helps to bind people together to reality and so on. So that's all I can say.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, sir. And also, I would say, you know, insofar as philosophy is also invitation, binding those niches together, bringing all of those fragmented categories together into dialogue as well. And so Dialogos perhaps, you know, may not be the mothership, but it can be some of the engineering that binds parts together and allows them to cohere in the kind of resonance that I've experienced with you today. So
at least there are at least some good teachers and libraries where all these books are available. Then I think you know, things will be fine.
Yes, I'm looking forward to visiting you in a very tasteful library at some point down the line. Hopefully lots of mahogany and dust and scrolls and things.
Or just an IKEA shelf.
Daniel, it's been really great to have you on. And yeah, I really just feel the clarifying spirit of participating in dialogue with you very much. So it's been great. Thank you.
Thank you as well. It was very nice to talk with you.